Been a long time.
Well, she probably
Forged in Nantucket.
I am too.
Fabulous. Gotta go. No. Look at this phenomenal computer. Make sure it's still intact. It's gonna assemble all that wealth and craftsmanship. No, I was. I was. Child. Stop. You gotta go. Stop. Oh, I can't wait. Yeah. That was really interesting. Her mother ate grapes. We're gonna all go. That's the area.
I'm praying for that I spot.
Met a lady.
Oh yeah. Right. This
I live in this. She graduated.
they are. Region. They are. So they want to get together. So the SAR does a place when you have the two together. She's petitioning.
I don't know how you do that.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. We're going to go ahead and get started. The hour has arrived. It's just a couple minutes after 11. My name is Wes Haygood. I am the president of the Colonel Tilghman chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. And I'm introducing Dana Newman, who is the director of the library here at Talbot County Free Library. She just wants to say a few words about logistics before we get started.
Good morning, everybody. How is everybody?
Good.
We really appreciate all of you being here. This is a Saturday, so we know that you have other commitments on Saturday, so thank you so much for being here. I wanted to let you know we do have bathrooms out in the lobby, so please take care of yourself. We are recording this program, so please, if you have a question, please speak up, but we do ask if you'll keep voices down so that the recording can be picked up in the room. And we do have people that I understand from Wes that are watching remotely. So you might just check your behavior because people are eyes on the crowd. I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. So we also have wonderful books as you're exiting to the right. We have our programs and also books on the table. So feel free to check out a book. This is a book on Tench Tilghman, but we do have other books on the Revolution back there. So without further ado, and again, this is our 100th anniversary. So this is a great program leading into Maryland 250. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it back to Wes.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, I'd just like to welcome a few different organizations represented here today. We have members of the Talbot County Council, Easton Town Council, I believe, or at least former member. We have representatives from the Talbot Historical Society, and of course, Dana with the Talbot County Free Library. I believe there's a representative here somewhere from the Water's Edge Museum, I hope. They're also one of our sponsors. Of course, the Sons of the American Revolution, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and citizens of Easton, Talbot County, the Eastern Shore, and elsewhere. That's all of you. This is what we're going to do today. I'd just like to mention our honored guests for a moment, tell you why we think it's important to celebrate Colonel Tench Tilghman Week, introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Richard Bell, who will give us the featured presentation. We might have a special visitor today, right after Dr. Bell finishes his presentation. I'd like to take 5 minutes or so to capture some lessons learned after you hear Dr. Bell's presentation and after you all ask any questions you may have. And then we have some of Colonel Tinch Tilghman's descendants here and also descendants of the Tilghman family on the Eastern Shore that I'd like to introduce. And some of them might stand up and take a minute or two and tell you what it means to them to be a descendant of someone who sacrificed so much for all of us. And I'll just mention that for those of you who are interested, from 2 to 4 today in the room right next door, the Frederick Douglass room, we're having a little workshop, how to join the SAR and DAR, if anyone's interested. We'll thank our sponsors, and then we'll close. So these are our honored guests. What I'd like you to do is just stand up and remain standing, and the rest of you hold your applause till I introduce all the honored guests that are here today. Starting with Pete Lesher, he's the Vice President of Talbot County Council. Everybody hold your applause. Pete is also a direct descendant of Colonel Tinch Tilghman. Dave Stepp, also a member of the Talbot County Council. I think we have Len Milkey here, another member of the...
And Chuck Callahan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chuck Callahan, the president of the Talbot County Council. Thank you, Chuck. Hold your applause. Is Al Silverstein here? I don't see Al. He was a former member of the Easton Town Council. Dan Earnshaw, where's Dan? There he is. He's the president of the Maryland Society Sons of the American Revolution. We have Denise Haygood. I think she might be out still checking people in the foyer there. Get them in. We have Libby Hinson in the back. Libby, raise your hand just so they know who you are. Libby's the treasurer of the General Perry Benson chapter of the DAR, who helped to sponsor this, and she's also been a treasurer of the Maryland Society Daughters of the American Revolution. Is Rebecca Kelly Taylor here? Oh, I don't see her. How about Jerry Seiler? Oh, that's right. Jerry Seiler had to go to Founders Day, didn't she? And then I didn't see Jay Lynn or Kay Brown. Okay, let's go on. So, everybody give them a round of applause. They make so much of what we do possible, so I appreciate you giving them the applause. So now, why do we want to celebrate Colonel Tinch Tilghman Week? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but number one, you all know that we're getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country. The Semi-Cinquentennial, an organization was created, I believe, by President Biden, being carried on by President Trump, called America 250, where they are planning to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the birth of our nation. There's also, in many states, a state-level organization. You'll see there, Maryland 250. They helped make this event today possible. Also, the Sons of the American Revolution is focused on the 250th event, as well as the Daughters of the American Revolution. In addition, the Talbot County Council again recently issued a proclamation declaring October 19th to 2025, 19th to 24, 2025 as Colonel Tinch Tilghman Week. And that's because the 19th was the date that Cornwallis surrendered in Yorktown. And then Colonel Tilghman was commissioned to take the words to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, and he arrived on the 24th. And then last year, the Easton Town Council also issued a proclamation declaring October 19th to 24th as Colonel Tinch Tilghman Week in perpetuity, meaning forever. But this is why we in the SAR and DAR believe it's important to celebrate Colonel Tinch Tilghman Week. He was a local American hero. He was born here in Talbot County. He was educated in Easton. He served as a captain of the flying camp in case of a British invasion of the colonies. He was George Washington's longest-serving aide-de-camp, think personal secretary. He helped to manage the war effort. That's a picture of him standing there with a side view. You see Washington, then Lafayette, and that's Tinch Tilghman. In his left hand, he has the conditions of surrender between Lord Cornwallis and General Washington. That picture, by the way, is in the State House in Annapolis, Maryland. That painting, I should say. But he's best known for performing that historic ride from Yorktown to Philadelphia, all along the way announcing, Cornwallis is taken, Cornwallis is taken, to let people know that the beginning of the end of the war had started. It was near. But He died fairly young, age 42, because he sacrificed his time, his fortune, his family, his reputation, and his health for all of us. And believe me, they weren't just doing this for themselves. They really knew that they were working on our behalf as well. And I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker. This is Dr. Richard Bell. He is a professor of history at the University of Maryland at College Park. He received his PhD from Harvard University and his BA from the University of Cambridge. He focuses on the history and culture of the United States between 1750 and 1877. He is a Revolutionary War expert. He has his new book out in the back, and he's very willing to sign it if anyone wants to purchase a copy today. That new book is called The American Revolution and the Fate of the World. It talks about how this revolution really had an effect upon the entire world, not just America and Britain and maybe France. The entire world was affected by it. And he's also the author of another book, Stolen. I think he has copies of that as well. 5 Free Boys Kidnapped in Their Astonishing Odyssey Home. He's also the author of 2 major online courses for the Great Courses. If any of you have taken those, they're wonderful. Now, let's see. There's a copy of the covers of his 2 books, just to let you know. And now, I'm asking Dr. Bell to come forward, and he's going to give us the featured presentation, Divided Loyalties, the Tilghman Family and the American Revolution. And please, please hold your questions until the end. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just give us 30 seconds to set up our tech here, so let the anticipation build. 30 seconds.
I'm going to leave this here because it's being live streamed.
Sounds good. All right, folks, I think our tech is live. Hello, folks. It's lovely to be with all of you. I've got to tell you, this is an intimidating gig. I'm in the belly of the Tilghman beast, right here. I'm looking at some Tilghman descendants while I talk about their family. That is an intimidating task. So have some, say a prayer for me, I guess. It's lovely to be with you. Also, notice the unfortunate accent I'm using today. When talking about, I teach at College Park, University of Maryland, and usually having a British accent in America, especially in the education space, can be an advantage because people think I'm smarter than I actually am because of this silly British accent I'm doing for you today. So when I'm talking about, the first European settlers or the Salem witch trials or the Civil War, my students are like, yeah, he must be really smart and know what he's talking about. He's got a British accent. Yeah, I trust him. And then every October we get to the American Revolution. And then 300 freshmen do this. So I just remind you, I'm not here as a spy or propagandist of King George III or King Charles III or anyone else for that matter. So I'm just here to give you what I think historians think is the straight dope here. Let's see how it goes. I'm going to talk for about 50, 55 minutes or so, and then we'll see what happens after that. He was still ravaged by fever. But Tench Tilghman was not about to refuse George Washington. The general, as Wes said, had pressed into his hand a sealed dispatch, the official report of Lord Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown, and ordered him to ride like the wind to Philadelphia to inform the Continental Congress. Tilghman knew the great weight of that glorious news. Yet Philadelphia lay 245 miles away, and every hour mattered. He set off from Yorktown in an open sailboat, the salt wind cutting his skin. But disaster struck. The careless boatman ran them both aground on the Tangier Shoals. All night and all day, Tilghman sat marooned, fever gnawing at his strength, the news of Patriot victory tracked helplessly next to him. At last, the tide lifted them free and they pressed north once again, but the waters beyond Annapolis proved no kinder. The calmed winds left his vessel drifting for hours, then the boat struck ground again. Taking a chance, he leapt ashore, demanded a horse, and spurred the animal inland. 130 miles still stretched ahead of him. For 3 days and 3 nights he rode hard, his small, slender body burned away by sickness, but his resolve as robust as ever. Cornwallis is taken, Cornwallis is taken, he bellowed to anyone in his path. He stopped just once at his father's home in Chestertown, Maryland, collapsing for a few hours there before the road pulled him onward. Through misty mornings, through fevered nights, he pushed his horse and his own body to the breaking point. At last, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 days after he set out from Yorktown, this exhausted rider thundered into Philadelphia. Pale, drenched in sweat and shaking with chills, Tilghman rode straight to the home of Thomas McKean, the president of the Continental Congress. He hammered at the president's door so violently that the night watchman in Philly tried to arrest him for disturbing the peace. When McKean opened the door and heard the news that Washington's most trusted aide had come bearing, everything changed. The night watchman now became the town crier, racing into the streets to shout, "All is well and Cornwallis is taken." The city erupted. Lights flared in the windows. The great bell of the State House rang out. Men, women, and children poured into the streets, cheering, weeping, embracing. Lieutenant Colonel Tench Tilghman's heroic ride from Yorktown to Philadelphia is a fitting counterpoint, I think, to Paul Revere's midnight ride from Boston to Lexington at the start of the war. A climactic bookend to years and years of struggle and sacrifice to make American independence into vibrant reality. Delivering that triumphant news to Congress was arguably the most prestigious assignment of the war. And George Washington gave that great honor to Tilghman, his closest, most trusted aide. So this morning, I want to use my time with you to explore Tench Tilghman's story. It's the story of how a privileged scion of the Maryland gentry ended up as Washington's aide de camp, serving at the general's side through thick and thin, and for longer than anyone else in Continental Army uniform. It's a story about the quiet power of behind-the-scenes service, about how a young man devoted to Washington and the military objectives he was fighting for did everything possible to support his mentor's mission. But Tench Tilghman's story is also much more even than that. You see, the Patriot leader's most trusted aide came from a decidedly unpatriotic family. Tench's father, James, was a resolute loyalist. Tench's brother, Richard, left revolutionary America to try his fortune in British India. Patriots publicly suspected Tench's brothers Jemmy and Billy of the same loyalism as their father, and Tench's younger brother Phil actually ran off to join Britain's Royal Navy. Only his uncle, Matthew Tilghman, a delegate to the Continental Congress, saw the war the way Tench did. So Tench Tilghman's story is really a family story. It's a story about a house divided, a family torn between loyalty to the crown and the cause of American independence. In that sense, the Tilghman's story is really America's story. Because although we've largely forgotten the fact today, the American Revolution was itself a cruel, fratricidal, civil war. That is certainly how people at the time described it, and soldiers and civilians alike used that term, civil war, thousands of times in their personal writings and in official correspondence to describe what they were experiencing in real time, civil war. Remember, when fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord, only about, we think, 40% of white colonists were actually patriots. The rest were unevenly and uncomfortably divided among steadfast loyalists and a large group of neutral, undecided independents. Today we'd call them swing voters. No surprise then that the Tilghmans split along the same fault lines as everyone else. The Tilghmans were not unique. Individuals' decisions to take different sides tore thousands of American families apart during this bitter brother against brother civil war. Yet, unlike so many other fractured families, the Tilghmans found ways to overcome their divisions. They certainly did not agree on politics, but they never lost sight of what they meant to each other. And they wrote lovingly and movingly to one another throughout this war. So in the second half of this talk, we'll try to examine what the Tilghman family's story reveals about unity, conflict, and the personal costs of nation building. More than just history. Perhaps this experience can offer all of us some useful insight, timely insight, into how we can bridge ideological divides today, drawing lessons from the past to foster understanding, civility, and common purpose in our ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union. Tench Tilghman was born into a wealthy and sprawling family on Maryland's Eastern Shore. He had 48 first cousins on his mother's side alone, and was thus related to pretty much every family of consequence in this region. He was one of 10 children, 6 boys, 4 girls, born to James and Anne Tilghman, and they christened him Tench in honor of his maternal grandfather. The lad attended a local plantation school for a few years before going to the College and Academy of Philadelphia, now known today as UPenn, of course. He graduated in 1761 when he was just 16, which is how they did things back then, and soon went into business with one of his many uncles. In 1765, the now 20-year-old Tench Tilghman decided to publicly protest the Stamp Act. He did so by signing a non-importation agreement, a pretty common decision among East Coast merchants keen to stay on the good sides of their angry and price-sensitive customers. But he did not participate more actively in the rising protests against the British government and its policies until fully a decade later, in 1775. By then, he'd fallen into the orbit of his Uncle Matthew, who led Maryland's delegation of anti-crown activists to the First Continental Congress. And Tench had evidently been stirred to action by news of the British offensives at Lexington and Concord. So in July of 1775, 30-year-old Tench Tilghman abruptly quit his business and rushed off to join the rapidly escalating war. Upon the breaking out of the Troubles, notice he calls them the Troubles, which is what we called civil war in Northern Ireland when I was growing up, right? Upon the breaking out of the Troubles, I came to a determination to share the fate of my country and that I might not merely be a spectator. He was living in Philadelphia at the time and so enlisted as a lieutenant in a local reserve unit. But it proved to be a poor fit for his ambitions. It was an unserious outfit, a social club for soft rich boys that the city's loyalist cruelly nicknamed the Ladies' Light Infantry. Tench soon left that unit and attached himself instead to Pennsylvania's Flying Camp Battalion, a group of mobile reservists who'd been tasked to rush to New York to join George Washington and the Continental Army to try to defend that city from British invasion. Tench was 12 years Washington's junior, but the two men were hardly strangers. They came from the same social background, the Chesapeake planter class, and Washington's pre-war diaries reveal that he and the Tilghmans had long been close and intimate, visiting each other's plantation houses, perhaps dozens of times, including at least one Christmas spent together. No surprise then that Washington invited Tench to join his staff soon after he arrived at Continental Army headquarters in Manhattan that August. Washington badly needed the help. There was a war to fight, but he was drowning in paperwork. Joseph Reed, one of two aides Washington had relied on since the previous summer, had taken a leave of absence 3 months earlier and had not returned. The aide who remained, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hanson Harrison, was understandably overstretched and couldn't manage the workflow on his own. There were piles of official correspondence that lay unanswered and urgent military and humanitarian orders that had not been dispatched. At present, my time is so taken up at my desk, Washington wrote in frustration, that I'm obliged to neglect many other essential parts of my duties. It is absolutely necessary for me to have persons that can think for me, as well as execute orders. Tilghman agreed to join Washington's staff, one of a bustle of young men Washington hired that year to try to professionalize his operations. And soon, Tilghman set about making himself indispensable. Tilghman's task was record keeping and correspondence. Working on a portable desk, he used his clean and legible handwriting. My students could learn a lot from his handwriting, and his crisp to-the-point writing style to see to it that Washington could transmit important information to officers in the field, to members of the Continental Congress, and to the several rebel-controlled legislatures. Tilghman also signed bills of credit, approved promotions, extended expiring terms of enlistment, controlled the meeting calendar, drafted passports, received the general's many visitors, and even sometimes interrogated POWs. Whatever the task, he proved himself dependable, discreet, highly competent, and eminently trustworthy. By 1777, much of the general's correspondence was in the handwriting of Tilghman. And as the war expanded, the volume of correspondence, incoming and outgoing, kept ratcheting up, seeming to increase exponentially. Tilghman and his fellow aides got so busy, they stopped making careful file copies of each outbound letter, simply preserving whatever drafts they'd made and stuffing them in chests to be sorted out later. Tilghman gave himself over to the work, and despite his low-key temperament, he quickly became popular among Washington's expanding stable of aides. There were 32 of them in all, usually 4 to 6 of them on staff at any one time over the 8-year war, all wearing, do you see, the green ribbon, denoting access to the inner sanctum, and sleeping together in a room across the hall from the commander-in-chief so as to be at his beck and call. Some lasted only a few months, but others like Robert Hanson Harrison and Alexander Hamilton worked alongside Tilghman for years at a time. Tench, of course, outlasted all of them. After Hamilton finally departed in 1781, there's a musical about that, Tilghman became General Washington's closest military advisor. The level of trust between these two men was so great that as time went on, Washington would simply sign whatever Tilghman put in front of him. And wherever Washington went, so too went Tilghman. Indeed, as one of his descendants later put it, to follow the career of Colonel Tilghman during the war would be to write the whole history of the Army under the immediate command of General Washington. Tilghman was with Washington in the thick of things during the Battle of Long Island and the Battle of Trenton. He was at Washington's side at Trenton and Princeton, at Valley Forge and Monmouth, at Morristown and at Yorktown, racing back and forth across the battlefields, exchanging orders and messages, and bringing the general reliable news from the front lines. Tilghman was Washington's eyes and ears, and also his mouthpiece. He was an extension of Washington himself. During the bitter Valley Forge winter, it was Tilghman who begged Congress for flour, cattle, food, and clothing, while also serving as the Army's de facto quartermaster until Nathaniel Greene and heading out on foraging missions across next-door New Jersey. While the compounding agonies of that infamous winter encampment led other unpaid officers to resign their commissions and return to their families, Tilghman always stuck it out. And for a long time, he refused all offers of proper compensation. Faithful to a fault, he provided damning witness testimony during Charles Lee's court-martial on July 4th, 1778, for disrespect to Washington, for disobedience of orders, and for making an unnecessary and disorderly retreat at Monmouth. And to Tilghman's lasting credit, he took no role in the Conway cabal. He visited his home and his family rarely, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion and illness. And he was still at Washington's side during the next winter encampments after Valley Forge, at Middlebrook and at Morristown. When Colonel Harrison finally resigned in the spring of 1781, Tilghman became the most senior member of Washington's office staff. Having long served as an uncommissioned volunteer, he took the opportunity to apply for a formal commission as lieutenant colonel. Washington wrote personally to Congress to endorse the request, telling members that Tilghman was a zealous servant and a slave to the public and a faithful assistant to me for nearly 5 years, a great part of which time he refused to receive pay. Congress quickly obliged, authorizing the commission and even backdating it all the way back to April of 1777 to ensure that there was no further question as to Tilghman's rank and seniority. All the while, Tilghman found new ways to prove his usefulness, both to Washington and to the Continental Army. Alongside Alexander Hamilton and John Lawrence, Tilghman was one of just 3 men at headquarters who spoke French. In fact, it became invaluable after France joined the war in 1778. On September 18th, 1781, for instance, Tilghman accompanied Washington to a council of war with Admiral de Grasse on board the Ville de Paris, the French flagship, and translated back and forth for the 2 coalition leaders. That summit proved decisive. Using Tilghman as his indispensable intermediary, Washington succeeded in persuading de Grasse to commit to the naval blockade that trapped Lord Cornwallis and a third of the British Army in North America at Yorktown. When Cornwallis surrendered a month later, it was Tench Tilghman, weakened by a bout of malaria, who transcribed the ceremonial copies of the terms of capitulation. Then Washington gave Tilghman the task of carrying one of those 2 documents bearing the Yorktown news to Philadelphia. A privilege, one biographer has written, it was probably the greatest honor that Washington granted to any of his aides during the war. Delivering that urgent, joyous news left Tilghman exhausted and bedridden for days. You might say that he never fully recovered. He requested a furlough soon afterwards and spent 5 months in Chestertown recuperating with his family while also pressing his suit with his first cousin, Anna Maria, the daughter of his Uncle Matthew. But while the suit went smoothly and he and Anna Maria soon married, his health never completely returned. A second extended medical leave eventually became permanent. He accepted an invitation to become a founding member of the Society of the Cincinnati, a fraternal group for Continental Army officers when it formed in November of '83, but formally resigned his commission at war's end that December. We think during a moving ceremony at the Maryland State House, at which George Washington famously did the same. After Congress set aside his long-shot nomination to serve as Secretary of State in the new national government, Tench Tilghman returned to his old merchanteering business. This time, he went into partnership with Robert Morris, the wealthy Philadelphia patriot who had financed much of the Revolutionary War. 10 years Tench's senior, Morris had known him since adolescence and admired his diligence and integrity, and took him on as his Baltimore partner in his expanding import-export business after the war. Trading under the name Tench, Tilghman and Company in order to do business in Maryland, where that name counted for a lot, the two partners exported Chesapeake tobacco and wheat to merchants in Cadiz, Bordeaux, London, Genoa, Barcelona, Hamburg, Lisbon, Bristol, and Marseille. In exchange, these foreign merchants sent European wine and various high-value manufactured goods back to Baltimore. Despite the post-war recession gripping much of the newly United States, his Baltimore-based business partnership boomed, and Tilghman was even flush enough with capital to become one of the investors in the first U.S. trading voyages to China in 1784. His new ventures made him a wealthy man, and he and Anna Maria soon moved into a smart new Georgian mansion across Lombard Street from the Friends Meeting House in Baltimore. There he entertained Tench's old friend, the Marquis de Lafayette, during his 1784 visit from France. Keen eyes will have noticed I keep putting block quotations over Lafayette's face earlier in the presentation, because there's a famous image of Washington and Lafayette and Tilghman that I keep showing you, but I don't want you to look at Lafayette, so I keep putting block quotations over his face. But they were friends, Tench and Lafayette. And then Tench and his wife welcomed George and Martha Washington when they visited the city too, and Tench also resumed his role as the old soldier's right-hand man, working as Washington's Baltimore agent to sell produce cultivated at Mount Vernon, to purchase agricultural supplies, and to hire workmen, tutors, and domestic servants to staff that estate's great house. Things were ticking along well enough until the fall of 1785, when an unnamed sickness, likely hepatitis or a return of the dreaded malaria, forced Tilghman to abandon his work and take to his bed for a full month. Knowing his susceptibility, his wife, his father, and his sisters all rushed to Tench's side. Although he later returned to his accounts, he remained in extremely poor health ever after. And he died at his Baltimore home on April the 18th, 1786, aged just 41. They buried him 2 days later in St. Paul's churchyard in the city. Anna Maria, 3 months pregnant with their second daughter, was grief-stricken. While she lived to be 87, she chose never to remarry. General Washington was also devastated. He sent heartfelt condolences, telling Tench's heartsick father that, excepting those of Tench's nearest relatives, none could have felt his death with more regret than I did, because no one entertained a higher opinion of his worth or had imbibed sentiments of greater friendship for him than I had done. The family that grieved the loss of Tench Tilghman in 1786 was by then one of the oldest in Maryland. His great-grandparents, Richard and Mary Tilghman, had arrived on the Eastern Shore from the county of Kent in England in 1662. Richard was the son of a grocer and had brought Mary, their 2 children, and 16 indentured servants to capitalize on the tobacco boom sweeping the new Maryland colony and establish a plantation on a tract of land near the Chester River. Their only surviving son, Richard Tilghman II, expanded the family's landholdings, wealth, and social capital, transitioning the plantation away from white indentured labor and towards enslaved African labor, and rising rapidly through the quickly forming ranks of the emerging tidewater gentry. James Tilghman, Tench's father, was Richard's 8th child. James would inherit 2,500 acres and several enslaved people, and he eagerly continued the family's investments in the tobacco business, as did several of his older brothers who cultivated even larger estates of their own. James also continued his family's ascent into the top ranks of Chesapeake society, wedding Anne Frances, the daughter of the head of one of the Eastern Shore's most prominent planter families. On their marriage, James opened a part-time law practice and began serving in Maryland's lower chamber, the House of Assembly. The newlyweds made their home on Anne's father's former plantation in Talbot County. And over the next 20 years, Anne delivered 10 children safely into the world. Tench, their first, arrived on Christmas Day in 1744. Yet giving birth to 10 children, roughly 1 every 2 years, for 2 decades, left Anne's health in tatters. So the family moved from Talbot County to Philadelphia in 1762 to be nearer the best physicians. There, her genteel and loyally husband James found favor with the Penn family, that colony's proprietors. In 1765, they appointed James to be secretary of the Pennsylvania Land Office, a high perch in government and the first of several patronage positions. That same year, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, a new piece of taxation policy that seemed to have been purpose-designed to upset him. By requiring every type of legal document to be taxed and stamped, the new law succeeded in antagonizing almost every professional paper pusher in the American colonies. Like his son Tench, James was indignant, writing to a friend that it was an instrument of financial oppression and complaining that members of Parliament were ignorant and impulsive for imposing it. While Tench largely stayed home, James attended several anti-Stamp Act protests in Philadelphia in September and October of 1765. James even led one of the marches to demand a local stamp tax collector resign, only for some of the 700 protesters to turn violent and try to lynch the poor man they'd come to intimidate. According to Deborah Franklin, wife of Benjamin Franklin, it took James Tilghman's superhuman effort to prevent the mob from falling on and destroying Mr. Hughes and his whole family that day. While 2 of James's brothers, Matthew and Edward, went on to embrace the Patriot cause, James was obviously spooked by his brush with mob violence. James would shun the anti-crown cause ever after. Like many office holders in the 13 colonies, his instinct told him to remain faithful to the great bureaucracy of empire that paid his salary and supported his family's comfortable lifestyle. So he kept what the British would call a stiff upper lip, and he tried to remain hopeful that better days lay ahead. As the imperial crisis escalated, James expressed continuing disappointment with the king's blundering ministers, but could not find cause or courage to forsake Britain forever. His ailing wife, Anne, died in December of 1771, aged just 45, a casualty of extended health problems and multiple strokes. Several of their children were still minors. While Tench was now 26, Thomas Ringgold, their youngest, was only 6. After Anne's death, their father James folded partly in on himself. And the responsibility of running the household devolved upon the 2 eldest girls, Anna Maria and Elizabeth. While James grieved, relations between Britain and her colonies were fast souring. He put the blame on both sides, condemning the Boston mob's mass destruction of private property in Boston Harbor in December of 1773, while also denouncing the vindictive retaliation that the King and Parliament meted out against everyone in Massachusetts in the form of the 1774 Coercive Acts. The authors of the present legislation must have very weak hands, James wrote to a friend, or must be very ignorant of American affairs, or they must have the worst of hearts. He predicted that Parliament's order to close the port of Boston will be attended with infinite distress, and he warned that if British ministers continue to try to force their will on the colonies, the flame will be catched throughout America. He was right. Anti-Crown activists formed the Continental Congress in September of 1774 to begin planning a coordinated colonial boycott of British imports. His own brother Matthew volunteered to serve as one of 5 delegates representing insurgents here in Maryland. But James disapproved of their Philadelphia meetings and the various resolutions and demands and chest-beating instructions that began emanating from them. James believed they would only make things worse. And he hoped against hope that moderates with clearer heads would seize control of the rapidly radicalizing protest movement and steer a course back towards peace, reconciliation, and redress of grievances. But events barreled forward, and James's hopes for reconciliation faded fast in the wake of violence at Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. Around Philadelphia, men and boys, including his own son Tench, began mustering. And when James started hearing the word independence on their lips, he feared the very worst. He wrote to friends telling them that he feared civil war, that declaring independence would divide the colonists, setting neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, father against son. Remember, James Tilghman was a creature of the establishment, a political moderate with close ties to Pennsylvania's proprietary government. He was intuitively loyal to the crown and wary of uncertainty and upheaval, especially as a widower with young children still at home. He counted 3 of Maryland's 4 signers of the Declaration of Independence among his social circle, Thomas Stone, William Paker, and Samuel Chase. But he nonetheless entered the war years with a bone-deep conviction that despite the weight of oppression the colonies were now under, that declaring independence was a remedy much worse than the disease. James believed that the best chance for him to sustain his income and property was by siding with the British, and so that's what he did. When his eldest son, Tench, joined George Washington's military family, James could not hide his displeasure. "I received your letter from New York, and I'm glad to hear you are well," he wrote to Tench. "But I cannot reconcile myself to your situation. I don't mean your being in the general service, as I think that preferable to any other where you are, but I mean your being engaged in a cause which does not coincide with your judgment, the support of independence, which sooner or later will, in my judgment, complete the ruin of America." As he wrote, the Patriots were taking aggressive steps to make loyalists' lives harder and harder and to stamp out all political opposition, especially in and around Philadelphia, the capital of the rebellion. For that reason, James sent his youngest son and his 4 daughters to the comparative safety of the Eastern Shore, a loyalist stronghold for much of the war. He remained in the big city, but his civil liberties there were soon under threat. Paramilitary committees linked to the Continental Congress were opening the mail of anyone they suspected of Toryism. That unprecedented invasion of privacy left James fretful. No man can either write or speak with any tolerable degree of freedom, James protested. In a public way, everything must move in what is called the line of liberty. In these circumstances, my attention will be taken up in keeping myself as much out of harm's way as I can. But staying out of harm's way in the rebel capital was next to impossible, especially after Pennsylvania's Patriot government passed the Test Act in June of 1777. It required all men over the age of 16 to swear a public oath renouncing the king, promising not to do anything to harm the Patriot cause, and to report on any neighbors who might be doing so. Those who refused to take the oath, and those caught violating its terms, could lose their right to vote, to run for office, to serve on juries, to sue for debts, to sell or buy land, and to keep and bear arms, while serial offenders could be jailed indefinitely without bail. The Patriots came for James on August the 4th, serving an arrest warrant signed by the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, a new rebel body that now claimed political authority over everyone in the state. The council deemed James and several other proprietary officials, including the governor, John Penn, to be in non-compliance for refusing to swear oaths under the new Test Acts, and ordered that they be held in a city jail until they signed a parole agreement. James had been expecting this, but it was still an extraordinary affront to his reputation as a gentleman, a man of honor and standing. He wrote to the council to denounce its decision to arrest him as the most arbitrary that can be imagined. Without the least insinuation that I have been guilty of anything which renders me suspicious, I'm taken up and considered in the light of a prisoner of war. He fumed indignantly. He refused to sign the parole unless it was amended to give him explicit liberty to move back and forth between his city house in Philadelphia and my family and estates in Maryland. To their credit, the Patriot Council members approved his modifications. So he signed the parole papers on August the 9th, effectively surrendering his right to speak or write about politics in public until one side or the other won the war. After signing his parole, James moved back to the Tilghman family seat in Talbot County. From then on, he did his best to keep his head down, so as not to run afoul of a similar Test Act on the books here in Maryland. Still, he refused to dignify either state's new oaths of allegiance to the insurgency with his signature, a refusal that drew his son Tench's attention. I wish for your own sake, and that of your family, and the preservation of our fortune, Tench wrote to his father on May 31st, 1778, that you would think seriously of conforming to the law of the country in which you are obliged to live. 2 weeks later, Tench tried again, sending a letter from Valley Forge to again press you to follow a step which several of your friends in similar circumstances of yourself have taken, to see you at peace with and conforming to what is now the establishment of this country would give me greater pleasure than anything I've experienced. Please, Dad, please. This time, James wrote back. He readily acknowledged the British government's own heavy-handedness and admitted that this bitter civil war the Tilghmans were now all caught in the middle of might well have been avoided by proper management. But he refused to budge on the question of the oaths. And he stuck fast to the belief that the Patriots' tactics were far more oppressive and grievous than anything King George had ever done. Now, I should point out here that the tone of these letters back and forth between father and son were not nearly as pointed and pained as you might be expecting. Both men made clear that they loved one another dearly, and they wanted what was best for each other in the face of difficult circumstances and impossible choices. As James wrote to Tench, whatever part you take, I hope and trust you'll act it in a becoming manner. God direct you, bless you, and protect you, my beloved son. Yet the stakes surrounding their impossible choices kept creeping higher. While Tench moved into George Washington's inner circle, James and other shunned loyalists found themselves pushed to the margins of society. The price of food and other necessities was surging across the Chesapeake, thanks to ruined crops and British naval blockades, and James's cash holdings all but evaporated due to rapid deterioration of paper currency. When they start putting out continental dollars in 1776, they're like for a third of a dollar, half a dollar, maybe a dollar. That's a big note. A couple of years later, how about a $55 note? That's a reflection of hyperinflation. The rebels had long since turned him out of all government positions, forcibly separating him from the £800 per year he'd earned in salaries and fees before the war. Still, at least he had his land still, and could still grow tobacco and wheat to sell at market. So James Tilghman, once one of the most up-and-coming men in Pennsylvania politics and government, returned to farming in Maryland to try to avoid abject financial ruin. Yet the war had followed him home, and it upended the rest of his family as well, particularly his next four oldest sons. Richard, his second son, had fled the rebel colonies for England in 1776, taking passage on the same ship as Robert Eden, Maryland's last colonial governor. Richard had studied law at London's Middle Temple Law School, but back before the uprising, like Benjamin Franklin's own son, William. And he now returned to the British capital in hopes of avoiding the worst of it. Richard soon signed on as a company lawyer with the British East India Company. The infamous, sorry, my slides got ahead of me there. Richard soon signed on as a company lawyer with the British East India Company, the infamous global mega corporation with ties to the British government, and he set sail for British India in the spring of 1777, putting as much distance as humanly possible between himself and the troubles in America. Richard found work as a barrister in the Bengal Supreme Court in Calcutta and died there in 1786. James's third son, James Jr., shared his brother Richard's lack of sympathy for the Patriot cause. Jemmy seems to have tried to keep his head down and mouth shut, yet he was nonetheless arrested in 1778 in connection with a voyage he had planned to the British Caribbean. The details are murky, but it's clear that the Patriots had their eye on him. And something similar happened to James Tilghman's fourth son, Billy. He tried to avoid service in Maryland's Patriot militia. That was enough to get him accused of being an internal enemy. And so when he attempted to flee the war and take passage to England in 1781 to pursue a law degree, like his older brother, the Patriots blocked his departure. Then there was Tilghman, James's fifth son. He protested his father's treatment at the hands of the Pennsylvania Council by rushing off to join Britain's Royal Navy in 1777, when he was just 16 years old. James thought Phil's decision was rash and indiscreet. Yes, they called him Phil, which I love. And James tried and failed to force the British Navy to discharge him. Phil would spend the last 6 years of the Revolutionary War in British naval uniform, lucky to survive a shipwreck off Cape Cod in November of 1778 that killed 21 other sailors, and seeing action in the English Channel during Spain's failed invasion of southern Britain the following year, and then also serving at the defense of British Gibraltar in 1781. All of these Tilghmans were mightily relieved when this brutal conflict finally ended in 1783. But despite the strong family bonds they'd all managed to maintain with Tench Tilghman and with Uncle Matthew, the news of the Paris peace did not undo the damage wrought on this fractured family by 8 years of civil war. James was furious to learn that British negotiators at the Paris peace talks had left American loyalists like him and so many of his children high and dry. You have seen the provisional articles between Great Britain and America. James wrote to a member of the Penn family in 1783, "You now see what is to become of the loyalists. Our treatment contains everything that is base, dishonorable, and inhuman." Friends of his, like the Penns, and so many other leading families, had seen their estates confiscated by the Patriots during the war, and the peace treaty signed in Paris left all of them with no path to restitution or appeal. And James's own losses were also considerable. My attachment to the royal cause and my aversion to the revolution has cost me dearly, he wrote in a heartfelt letter to distant Philemon in October of 1784. As the historian Jessica Sheets reminds us, James had lost his jobs in the Pennsylvania government, watched his sons make decisions he did not agree with, and suffered an arrest. He knew that his life would have been far easier if he renounced his loyalty. Yet he also knew that loyalist families without a son serving as General Washington's right-hand man had fared far worse. "My lot is happy compared with that of some of my friends," he wrote that June. And he resolved, now that the war was over, to try to make the best of whatever occurs. What occurred next, however, nearly struck James down. When his beloved son Tench died suddenly in April of 1786, James took the news as any loving father would. "In him I have lost the most dutiful and affectionate son that any man ever had," he told Tench's business partner, Robert Morris. And when word reached him just weeks later that Richard, his second son, had died somewhere in the Indian Ocean, James collapsed. "The news," he wrote to Phil, "struck me like daggers to my heart. I had not recovered from the loss of poor Tench, when I'm again wounded in a part equally tender, and my heartstrings again put to the proof. It seems as if affliction had singled me out for its principal mark." Trying to gather what family he still had left around him, James urged his prodigal son to abandon the Royal Navy and return to Chestertown. Phil finally did as he was told, bringing with him a British admiral's daughter with whom he'd recently eloped. That's a whole other story. Still, tranquility continued to evade them all, and the war's grip on the Tilghman family did not suddenly let up after the outbreak of peace. You see, for many patriots, winning the war was just not enough. Some were now demanding loyalist scalps. In Philadelphia, for instance, die-hard patriots circulated what they ominously called the blacklist, a list of those Tories who took part with Great Britain in the Revolutionary war and were tainted of high treason. While George Washington and Alexander Hamilton urged amnesty and reconciliation, other patriots simply refused to forgive and forget. James's fourth son, William, was nearly driven from the bar after the war because some of his colleagues felt he was not a person of known and unquestionable attachment to the independence of America. It took him almost a decade of dogged work to overcome that sort of lingering post-war suspicion. But he did ultimately manage it. By the time James Tilghman died in 1793, his son, William, had managed to scrub the stink of wartime loyalism off his record, embrace the burgeoning national myth that every American had been a patriot during the Revolution, and parlay his legal practice into a platform for a solidly uncontroversial career in public service. First as a state delegate and state senator, and then as Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. His older brother, Jemmy, also eventually took up a seat in the Maryland legislature, and three of their four sisters later married men of good standing and repute, a fact that demonstrates the success of the Tilghmans' efforts to rebuild their social capital after the upheavals of the recent Civil War. Over the generations since, Tilghmans have embraced Tench's memory with particular reverence and enthusiasm, in part as a way to reintegrate this once partly loyalist family back into post-war American society. Many other divided families with loyalists in their branches have done exactly the same. Think of the Franklin family. I think this impulse is right and proper. Nonetheless, the net result is that we in America have systematically and knowingly downplayed the level of internal opposition to American independence during the war years, retiring words like civil war in favor of words like invasion and conquest to describe British behavior. The specter of divided families like the Tilghmans has slowly faded into history as nation builders here have worked to create a usable past built around the myth of wartime unanimity. In 1971, the Tilghman family paid to move Tench's remains from their resting place in Baltimore and rebury them in the family plot on the Eastern Shore, within sight of the home where his widow once lived, and he rests in that cemetery today. The Tilghman family, some of whom I'm honored to say are here with us today, also cleaned up his old gravestone and remounted it in its new position. Its inscription, describing Tench's invaluable wartime service to George Washington's Continental Army, suggests to all those who have read it over the years that the Tilghmans and other families across America like them were all staunch patriots back during the turmoil of the Revolution. The truth is, I think, much more complicated, and I think much more interesting. Thank you very much indeed. We are going to do questions a little bit later on, but I've just got an important message from a courier rider that someone is about to join us. Someone I've mentioned a few times. You will not believe it. We are about to be joined. Wait for it. Give him a hand. Matthew Tilghman.
I'm not certain about these newfangled things you all have these days, so I'm gonna try and do this. Can you all hear me? Okay, very good. Yes, I am Matthew Tilghman. And it is with great affection and honor that I come before you today, and especially in front of our honored guests, our distinguished guests, and especially I'm proud of some of my descendants who are here today as well. I know that you are all fellow patriots who are dedicated, honoring, promoting, and protecting our American ideals and traditions. And so, Dr. Bell, I thank you for your excellent, very informative, and interesting presentation today. And I understand you might have a few questions for me.
That is right. I don't often get to interview my subjects. Let me ask you a couple of questions, see what you have to say. First of all, what was it like to live during the American Revolutionary War?
Well, it was very difficult and perilous. The outcome of the war was to determine my fate, the fate of my countrymen, and the fate of America. The men, women, and children of Maryland suffered greatly before, during, and after the war. But it was our love of freedom and our hatred of tyranny that enabled us to carry on through much hardship, to eventually win the war and protect our rights, secure our freedoms, and establish a new nation for ourselves, for our children and our grandchildren, and for posterity. That means all of you. We knew the fate of many generations of Americans hung on our efforts. My dear friend Benjamin Franklin once said, "We must all hang together or will assuredly hang separately." And many of my fellow patriots would most assuredly have been hung by the crown for treason had we lost the war. We were viewed as rebels, rabble, agitators by members of Parliament. I would likely have danced from a rope upon a gallows, perhaps built on the front lawn of the Talbot Courthouse. Have you heard of it? I think it's very near here, isn't it, Mr. Lesher? Well, in any event, some in England and the Loyalties in America called us scum, even though we were born to the most prestigious and prosperous family in America. My grandfather, Richard Tilghman, was among the earliest settlers and members of the Tilghman family in Maryland around the mid-1600s. My father, also a Richard, purchased land in what has now become known as the Hermitage in Queen Anne's County. It was a little way from here on what is now known as Tilghman Cove, off the Corsica River, which is off the Chester River, as many of you know. And I was the youngest of 9 children. I was born in 1718 to Richard Tilghman and Anna Maria Lloyd at the Hermitage. I lived there as a young lad until I established my own plantation at Rich Neck in Talbot County, Maryland. Rich Neck is between Eastern Bay and the Miles River, near the village of Claiborne, and off of what is now known as Tilghman Creek. Have you ever heard of it? You have? It sure surprises me to find so many places around here with my family name attached. My poor old body still lies there, interred at Rich Neck, in the family graveyard, along with the rest of my family. Dr. Bell, is there anything else you would desire to know before I must take leave of such pleasant company?
I know your time is short. I have just 2 more questions for you. One is, can you talk about what you did in the American Revolutionary War that may have put your own life in danger if the British had ever got hold of you?
Oh, yes, oh my. There were so many things which I became involved, and that would have perturbed King George and Parliament. Would you like to hear a few? Yes. Good. Well, there was that unjust insult imposed upon all the colonies called the Stamp Act. Now, I know I'm going to repeat a number of things that Dr. Bell has said, but I hope you'll listen anyway. In 1765, 10 years before the war commenced, I was a member of a committee appointed to draw up the protest against that Stamp Act. And as a result, it was fortunately repealed in 1766. That's only 1 year. So the stand back only took place for 1 year, and it was our first taste and enjoyment of success as we sought to reclaim our rights as Englishmen. We were adamant that Parliament should not tax us. We did not have representation in Parliament. No taxation without representation became our rallying cry. About 1773, I helped Maryland's Committee of Correspondence to connect Maryland to other colonies and to coordinate resistance against onerous British policies. The idea arose from Samuel Adams, from the city of Boston in the province of Massachusetts Bay. Have you ever heard of Samuel Adams? Oh, right, good. I hear he makes, I hear a fine brew is named after him. But to continue on. Then to rub salt in our already open wounds, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, or as we called them, the Intolerable Acts. Samuel Adams formed a collection of able-bodied men known as the Sons of Liberty to resist these intolerable acts that they placed upon all of the colonies. But things became progressively worse. Oh yes, the Boston Tea Party. In December 1773, the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Indians, boarded a ship in Boston Harbor. They dumped numerous chests of His Majesty's tea into the harbor. And then they had a marvelous tea party. This so enraged Parliament and King George, they passed the Boston Port Act. This caused the British Navy to close the port of Boston until such time as we paid for that spoiled tea. But that would be quite difficult to do since the price of the tea in dollars today would have been approximately $3 million. Not a small sum at that time. In Maryland, we had to decide whether we would remain loyal to the king, loyal to King George, or stand with our fellow citizens in Boston. Those Sons of Liberty. Well, we chose liberty. This led to the creation of the Talbot Resolves in 1774, where I and several of the most prominent gentlemen in Talbot County composed these resolves. And we resolved as friends to liberty and the general interests of mankind. And a lot more, as this is a copy from the Maryland Gazette, you see. But we were still committed at this time to remain as loyal Britons, with hopes for a resolution from the crown. Shall I go on? Thank you. Well, then there was a committee of safety. I served as chairman of that committee in 1775 to protect citizens against the invasion of British regular troops. I called them lobsterbacks, if you will. And there was also the Maryland Assembly. I served as a member of the Maryland Assembly from 1751 to 77. I was Speaker of the House until 1775. I served as president of Maryland's Revolutionary Convention that directed the affairs of the colony from 1774 to 77. Well, I don't want to bore you. I hope to retain some humility here. Shall I go on?
Yes.
Oh, yes. The Declaration of the Association of Freemen of Maryland. They had long names back then, too. On behalf of Maryland's convention, I issued the Declaration of the Association of the Freemen of Maryland on July 26, 1775. This proclamation established the colony's official support for the American Revolution, including to repel by force the British troops. We also agreed to support the Continental Association's trade embargo. Since the port of Boston was closed, we agreed with all the other colonies to neither import nor export goods from America to England or vice versa. The Declaration of the Association of Freemen of Maryland was a step towards independence. It was a forerunner to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was issued a year later, on July 4th of 1776. I attended the Continental Congress and helped to draft the Declaration of Independence, and I voted in the affirmative for the Declaration. It was, though, perhaps, one of the few regrets that I have in life, and that I did not sign it. You see, I was so inspired and pressured to ensure independence for our own great province of Maryland that I answered the call. I was summoned to Maryland from my seat in the Continental Congress to serve as president of Maryland's body to draft the first Declaration and Charter of Rights and Plan of Government. It was the Constitution for the state of Maryland. And so, this very honorable gentleman, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, assumed my seat in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress and signed in my stead. Finally, I was elected as a member of the state Senate in 1777 and was reelected, but chose to resign and return to my beloved home in Rich Neck to live out my remaining days in peace until my death in 1790. It was a blessing to live such a long 72 years. And these were my most famous positions, but only a small fraction of the positions that I held in the country, the state, and the counties of Queen Anne's and Talbot. As you can see, I was a very busy patriot, with plenty of reasons to have hung my head on, literally. I am also gratefully honored to understand that after my death, I came to be known as the Patriarch of Maryland, and also as the father of the revolution in Maryland. Wow, I humbly thank all of you that may have contributed to such lofty titles. Any other questions, Dr. Bell?
You are loquacious.
Thank you very much,
Jill,
sir.
so I hesitate to ask you another question. One more question here. I've been emphasizing, family relationships within the Tilghman family in my presentation. How did you try to keep relations with your own brother James affectionate, given that you were a patriot and he'd made a different choice?
Very good question. Oh, yes. It was actually extremely difficult during those times to do so. You see, my brother was a loyalist. Since he remained loyal to the crown during the war, where I was a Whig or a patriot, since I supported the cause of independence from Britain. I much prefer the term patriot to Whig, by the way. Now, just to go aside a little bit, my dear nephew, Tench Tilghman, you've heard a lot about him today. He was my brother James Tilghman's son and decided to throw his lot in with those of us who decided to resist the British acts. These acts sought to deprive us of our rights as Englishmen and enslave us to the whims of Parliament and the Crown. Oh, one aside on Tench. He was not only my nephew, but my son-in-law. That's right, my nephew and my son-in-law. That may puzzle some of you. You see, it was a custom in those days to marry our first cousins.
It's an English tradition.
Well, it's to keep very popular there too. I'm glad to hear. Well, and it was to keep the bloodlines and our fortunes in York. I married my first cousin, Anna Lloyd. Tench married my youngest daughter, Anna Maria, who is also his first cousin. So you see, it gives some truth to the term kissing cousins. Well, anyway, I often saw Tench and believe my positions had a great effect upon him. I do believe my brother James blamed me for the actions Tench took to volunteer as a lieutenant in the Light Infantry Company in Pennsylvania, known, as you heard, the Ladies' Light Infantry, or the Silk Stockings Company. Both terms of derision served up by the Loyalists, who mocked this group of brave patriots due to the nature of their birth from families of wealth and prestige. Afterwards, Tench unit was folded into the flying camp, where he served as captain. This was an elite and respected group of men from Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, who were asked to protect the citizens of the Mid-Atlantic region from the invasion of the British troops. You know, I dined and even spent the night at Mount Vernon on several occasions with my good friend, the Honorable and most hospitable General Washington. I am proud to say that it was because of our relationship that I was able to introduce Tench to General Washington, because he also joined me on occasion at Mount Vernon. It was during this time that Tench came to General Washington's notice. Washington had a great eye for talent, realized Tench could be more useful serving as aide-de-camp, or one of General Washington's personal secretaries, to help General Washington manage the war effort. You see, Tench could write a good letter quickly, and Washington desperately needed his services. Tench was Washington's most loyal and longest-serving aide-de-camp from the time he joined Washington in 1777, I think you said. Yes, I have to be corrected. I forgot. He served as an aide until the end of the war in 1783. He was by Washington's side in every major battle in which Washington led the Continental Army. Now back to my brother, James. James was living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as you heard before, when the war began, and he was placed under house arrest by Pennsylvania state authorities during the Revolutionary War. I would visit James whenever possible when I was in Philadelphia, and I did what I could to ensure he was comfortable and treated fairly during this time. Although he remained loyal to Britain, he was not about to take up arms and fight the Patriots. James tried to remain neutral during the war, but there was no neutrality in the colonies. One had to pick a side. Although we chose different sides, that did not diminish our affection for one another, and I loved him until his dying day. Talking about loving hearts and having a heart in the right place, I cannot go on without mentioning, in addition to all my heretofore mentioned exploits, the reasons for my energies and abilities to help this great nation. You see, being educated by the Reverend Hugh Jones, rector of St. Stephen's Parish in Cecil County, I gained a great devotion and relationship with God. I was an Anglican and a vestry member of St. Michael's Parish right here in Talbot County, and a trustee of the Charity Work School. I am proud to say that my obituary notes that I was ever considered one of the finest and most zealous advocates of civil and religious freedoms. Well, I've gone on long enough, and it's time for farewell. As I hear I'm being called back, so I must bid you adieu. But before I go, I want to leave you with a thought penned by one of your great American presidents. I understand he was an actor. He spoke the following words in his first inaugural address. Freedom is a fragile thing and is never more than one generation from extinction. It is not ours by inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. For it only comes once to a people. Those who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again. Well, farewell, my dear Dr. Bell, and my fellow Marylanders. You've come a long way with this unique and great experiment of ours and mankind. So I say, keep the faith, and I should hope and pray to see you all again on the other side. May God save this great republic.
I want to thank our special guest, Matthew Tilghman. If you want to collect a Patriot's autograph afterwards, I'm sure he'd be willing to do that. Snip a lock of his hair as a sacred relic, or introduce him to the concept of a selfie. I'm sure he'd be delighted. In the meantime, I imagine he's harassing some loyalists in the lobby. Let's see if there's any comments or questions anyone would like to advance here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I am curious if you could say a little bit more about what made James Tilghman a loyalist rather than somebody who was neutral, and maybe at most you could say he just wanted this mess to go away. Yeah. Did he do anything in the positions that he held in Philadelphia to further the loyalist cause? Was there anything about Great Britain that he thought was preferable to what might happen here, so that, he would say, not just I want this mess to go away, but we are losing something great if they don't win?
Right. The second question is easier to answer than the first. The first one is, one of these sticky wicket questions, a thorny question, because we're trying to decide who belongs in what box, and we're trying to do that with 250 years of distance between us and them, and that's challenging, right? So we could enforce and employ a very strict definition of who's a patriot and who's a loyalist, and that definition might be something like, you're a patriot if you fight in the war, right? You're a patriot if you join a state militia. You're a patriot if you join the Continental Army or the Continental Navy or a privateer. You take up arms in combat. And that would mean the number of patriots in America is only 200,000 out of 2 million white colonists, right? 10%. We could do the same with loyalists, right? We could say that you're only a loyalist if you join one of the British Allied loyalist regiments and take up a weapon to articulate that position, and that would mean there are only 19,000 white loyalists in America out of 2 million, and everyone else must be undecided. But that doesn't sit right with us, right? Because we know that there were plenty more people who supported the patriot cause without going off to war. Think of everyone on the home front. Think of people contributing to the war effort indirectly, keeping the home fires burning, keeping the family business going while husbands and sons went off to fight. Think about people who signed petitions, right, encouraging members of Congress to declare independence and so on. We know that the, for lack of a better word, silent swathe of people who supported the patriot cause without picking up a musket was substantial. Right? Well, we reckon that about 40% of the 2 million white colonists were patriots in this looser definition I'm giving. And I think we've got to give the same flexibility to loyalists as well. If we just count people who take up arms, then yeah, it's a small number, right? But I think to read James's writings, which as you've seen are voluminous and surviving, he's pretty clear that he knows who he is. There's probably a time as this conflict is escalating when he thinks of himself as a swing voter, as an independent in the middle. But I think when push comes to shove and that middle ground disappears, everyone basically has to pick a side. That 40% of swing voters, that's at the start of the war. That vanishes and vanishes and vanishes and vanishes until people are pushed to one corner or another. So when push comes to shove, I think James's surviving writings make pretty clear that he sees himself on the loyalist side there, and that's certainly how his son Tench, who saw himself as a patriot, viewed his own father as a lawyer. So we should listen to that dynamic, I think. Why would someone like James take that position? This is hard for us to get our heads around now because we know the patriots win. And we know that the United States is going to rise over 250 years, not immediately, but over 250 years to become the world's dominant power. No one in Maryland in 1777 knows that or thinks that, right? So we've got to put us back into the contingent moment of the war. If you are a planter, if you're a man of privilege, if you've got a government job, you're already winning life's lottery there, and you don't want anything to threaten that. What threatens that is change. What threatens that is upheaval. What threatens that is uncertainty there. So people in those positions are perhaps naturally inclined to take the status quo position. The status quo position is loyalism, right? More of the same. Yes, maybe things are getting worse. Maybe we think Grenville, the prime minister, is a tool, is bad at his job, should be kicked out. But fundamentally, we think eventually we'll get through this crisis and there'll be a brighter future on the other side within the British Empire, which for a planter in Maryland is the world's largest free trading zone, right? If you're a planter in Maryland, or you're a rice grower in South Carolina, or you're a sugar grower in Barbados, you can't imagine a world in which you maintain your prosperity without all your international customers in Britain. So that's part of his thinking, I think. There. Let's take one more, then I'm happy to answer other questions privately. Have I exhausted you? Okay, well, let's see if Wes wants to conduct some more business up here. I'll just say I brought a couple of books. There's a few copies in the back. I'm happy to share them with anyone who'd like to buy one. Thank you.
need help? Yeah.
I don't want to pull anything in front of the laptop. Yeah, I'm just gonna go back to just for. Okay, thank you, sir.
We're in trouble now.
Might have to add lib it, Wes.
Very good at guessing passwords. Okay. Did you like our featured guest, Matthew? He's amazing. That was Rick Collada portraying Matthew Tilghman. He is the official town crier for the town of Easton, Talbot County, Caroline County, and now I understand Queen Anne's County. I just want to take a couple minutes, 3, 4, 5 things, whatever comes to mind. I want to ask you as a group, what did you learn from Dr. Bell and Matthew Tilghman about how to maintain strong family relationships in the divided times in which we live, in the same manner that they did in the divided times in which they lived? If you're brave, raise your hand. Yes.
I think that they made a point to express their love to one another before expressing their political opinions.
Right. Okay. Political. What else did you learn? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
To try to use persuasion rather than vitriol.
Okay. Persuasion versus vitriol. I'm not sure how to spell that. Yeah, so, yes, ma'am.
They valued each other's worth and contribution.
They valued each other's worth. And what was the last word?
Contribution.
Contribution. Okay. Anything else that came to mind as you were listening? Yes, sir.
Importance of communication and keeping channels open.
That's right. Keeping communication channels open. Lots of letters were going back and forth during the war. Absolutely. Yes.
They were willing to accept one another's differences and realize they couldn't persuade them.
Okay. So they were willing to accept others' differences when they couldn't persuade them. Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I learned that Matthew Tilghman, faith was to him, and I didn't know that he was an Anglican and at St. Michael's Church. That was very interesting.
So the importance of his faith informing his behavior and so forth?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're good. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Let's apply these